Before we begin, as is often the case in these episodes in this series, I want to invite you to take a quick pause. The conversation we're about to have touches on some subtle manipulation, curiosity, and emotional captivity, especially in the context of grooming movements. So if your body or heart even seems slightly unsettled, please listen to that wisdom. The space here is to help you find freedom and not to force healing before you're ready. So you can pause, you can come back later, and when you're ready, your voice and your presence will still matter. So let's begin with that out of the way. It didn't start with loyalty. It often, I think, starts with curiosity. Not with allegiance, but with a question. See, you weren't trying to find a movement, you were just trying to find a moment, right? A moment of resonance, a moment of clarity, a moment where your pain finally made sense. And I mean, they gave it to you, right? They offered you a sentence that felt true. And they've offered you like an explanation that made things click. A narrative or a storyline that gave you someone to blame, maybe even yourself. And in that instant, you felt seen. That's how it begins, I feel. Not with force, but with a sense of familiarity. You don't feel manipulated, you feel understood. And you don't feel afraid, you just feel relieved. Because someone has finally named what you've been feeling for many years. And maybe it was harsh. Maybe it was dark. Maybe it felt really extreme. But it also felt real. And in a world that's full of platitudes and just be positive kind of voices, this one here really felt magnetic. And so you kept listening and you watched another video and you followed the page. And then you joined the group. And then you started reading through the threads. And then you engaged and you felt validated. And slowly, over time, that curiosity, that beautiful human instinct to make sense of pain, it becomes the very thing that ends up binding you. This is the genius of grooming. It doesn't require deception. It just requires direction. A slight nudge, perhaps, in that direction, right? A subtle reframe, a breadcrumb of content that gradually shifts your emotional GPS. And all this happens until the places that once felt like home now feel untrustworthy. And the new voices, the sharper ones, the ones who echo your hidden frustrations, they start to feel like the only ones who are telling the truth. But here's what they don't tell you though. They didn't give you truth. They gave you kind of like a trap sort of a logic. A version of the world that can't survive outside their echo chamber. A version of healing that always circles back to their framework. Or a version of belonging that only works as long as you keep nodding. Because the moment you stop nodding, the warmth in essence disappears. The resonance fades away. The validation turns cold. The language of solidarity becomes, in essence, the language of shame. And then suddenly you realize you weren't in a community. You were in a funnel. A funnel that was designed to keep you curious just long enough to turn that curiosity into commitment. And then commitment morphs into compliance. And compliance eventually leads you to captivity. But by the time you see it, it's already gotten into you. And you've started quoting their logic. And you've started framing your pain through their lens. And you're suspicious of anyone who doesn't use their language. And you become defensive when people question what you now defend. And then isolated from all the voices that once grounded you, you're in a new track. And it didn't all happen at once. It happened in these layers, right? The first layer was curiosity. You were just exploring. You were just asking. You were just poking around. But then came the second layer. The second layer, which was emotional resonance, where you felt seen. And then when you're starving for validation, resonance starts feeling a lot like rescue, right? But then there's the third layer on top of that, and that's where the hook kind of sets in. And it's like an ideological kind of bonding, if you will. And now it's not just content anymore, it's like an identity of sorts. You're not just interested, you're actually, now you're invested. And if someone challenges what you've started to believe, well, that feels personal, right? And you defend it like you're defending yourself, because it has in essence become a part of yourself. But I don't think that's failure. That's not a failure. That's how pathological and psychological grooming works. It builds these bridges from your pain to their narrative. And the more pain you have, the more bridges that they can build. And you see, they don't care if you're healed. They just care that you stay connected, right? So the goal is not clarity. The goal is really captivity that feels like clarity. And so you're offered answers, but only from one angle. And you're invited into to think with them, but only within these certain parameters that they draw out for you. You're allowed to question, but only people outside the group. Never question the group itself. And that's when you know you're no longer exploring anymore. You're actually being assimilated. And it doesn't feel like brainwashing though. It feels like you're finally waking up. But what if waking up means means that you're being handed a different dream? One where your pain is never allowed to rest, only repurposed. One where your anger is always justified, but never really examined. One where your loyalty is demanded, but never earned. See, that's not liberation. That's a narrative trap. And if you're in it now, or if you're slowly realizing that you were, I want you to hear this. You're not broken for being curious. You were hungry for clarity, hungry for understanding, hungry for a name, for what you've actually been carrying this long season. And they didn't prey on your weakness. They were in essence preying on your humanity. And that's what makes this so cruel. They used your desire for healing to deepen your dependence. They used your questions to install their answers. And then they used your openness to, in essence, plant walls. And now maybe you feel stuck. Maybe you're feeling confused and ashamed. Maybe you're even angry at yourself for not seeing this sooner. But this is not where your story ends. Because if curiosity brought you in, clarity can lead you back out again. Clarity does not shame you. Clarity invites you to see more fully. Clarity, in essence, says, yes, that first message felt real, but what came after it was not healing. It was programming. Clarity says, I can hold the truth that something once helped me, and I can still walk away when it begins to harm me. See, clarity goes on further to say, my curiosity is not the enemy. My curiosity is the compass that will lead me home again. Because my dear listener, you don't have to stop being curious. You just have to stop being controlled. You, you don't have to throw out every insight that you've gained. You just have to hold them with open hands and then ask what's still true without the fear of exile. And that's the real test. Can you question it and still feel safe? Can you express doubt without being shamed? Can you walk away without being punished? If the answer is no, it's not truth. That's a trap. And you are allowed to leave traps, even if they once felt like home, even if they helped you once, even if they gave you the language that you found so helpful to be understood. You are allowed to walk away when the path that once felt clarifying now starts turning into chains. You're allowed to re-examine the logic. You're allowed to return to your voice. You are allowed to bring your curiosity back to yourself again and not to someone else's agenda. You were never meant to be captured by content. You were never meant to be shaped into a tool for someone else's ideology. You were never meant to lose yourself inside a message that only feels good whenever you agree. You are more than your alignment. You are far more than your loyalty. You are more than your questions. You are more, and you always have been. If this episode has helped you see your path a bit more clearly, especially if you've been in or near a grooming dynamic, consider coming back tomorrow for the episode I'm going to post. The title on that one is The Weight of Shame. Because once you start waking up to how fast it happened and how subtly your curiosity was weaponized, the next emotion that often comes is shame. And we're going to talk a little bit about why it lands so heavy and why it often keeps victims silent and what it takes to lift it off of your sense of wholeness and to start experiencing freedom in the way you walk again. But until then, stay curious, my dear listener, not to be captured, but to stay whole. I appreciate you listening to this episode. See you tomorrow.